We're going to look at three things about the birth of Jesus. Christmas is a celebration of the birth of Jesus. Christmas is a word. It says Christ. It's made up of two words, Christ and Mass. Yes, Christ and Mass. Christ meaning Jesus or Messiah. Mass meaning a celebration. So Christ celebration. You probably remember that from last time. But we're going to look at three things about the birth of Jesus that makes it really important, okay? That makes this season so special. And I'll have some things for you guys to read, but I won't read this text real quickly. Hope I don't choke on my gum here. It says, in those days, and this is again the text we looked at last time, but there are some new things you're going to learn if you did listen in well last Wednesday night. I'm glad you did. Thank you. It says, in those days, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered. This was the first registration when Quirinius was governor of Syria. And all went to be registered, each to his own town. And Joseph also went up from Galilee, from the town of Nazareth, to Judea, the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and lineage of David, to be registered with Mary, his betrothed, who was with child. And while they were there, the time came for her to give birth. Boom, right? Actually, that's not what it does. And she gave birth to her firstborn son and wrapped him in swaddling cloths and laid him in a manger because there's no place for them in the inn. All right. First thing is that we're going to see here that is very important to the birth of Jesus, to our understanding of it, is that the birth of Jesus is historic or historical. Somebody raise their hand and I'll call on you to read this top one here. We got y'all three. How about we just do it like this? So, Leah, you want to read it? Sorry.
In those days,
yeah.
In those days, a decree went from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered. This was the first registration when Quirinius was governor of Syria, and all went to be registered each to his own.
Thank you. I'll have you read the next one, Barry, and then I'll have Corey read the other scripture verse there. It says here, first we see that the birth of Jesus was historic. It's actually something that took place, and there's actually historical circumstances surrounding the birth of Jesus that God brought about so that Jesus would be born in the exact place where God wanted him to be born. Luke is describing the historical circumstances surrounding Jesus' birth. Now first he says, in those days a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered. Again, you guys are familiar with Julius Caesar. And there's really something important about Caesar there. Caesar Augustus was the ruler of Rome at this time. And Rome basically dominated the whole world. The Mediterranean world, the Middle Eastern world. Rome dominated all that area, basically. And Caesar, Julius Caesar was such a great emperor, such a great ruler in Rome, that all the emperors down after him took his name Caesar because it carried so much honor. It carried so much pride and honor and respect. So this man's name, actually in the historical books, it was Octavian. So if you read about him in your history books, it's Octavian. But in this text, he's called Caesar. And what he does, what this ruler does, is that he sends out a decree. He's sending his messengers to all the people of the world, this part of the world anyway, that all the world should be registered. Now, this registration, as you probably know from last time, was not a registration for the army. You know, Caesar didn't want to know how many people could join his army and just wanted to get them registered. This registration was to pay what?
Taxes.
Taxes. Yes, this registration was to pay taxes. It was tax time, basically. For those of you who do not work full or part-time jobs, you don't have to worry about that. But when you do work a job, you'll have to pay taxes. And they're due every year by April, correct? Now, they can never get mine paid on time. They're either too early or too late, which being too early is not a problem. Being too late is a problem. But when you guys work, you will have to pay taxes. And what that does, that pays for governmental facilities, governmental organizations. You know, you'll be funding, the police. You'll be funding the military, different things like that. You'll be funding things you don't want to fund either. In fact, part of our tax dollars pays for organizations like Planned Parenthood and abortion clinics and such things as that. But there's nothing we can do about that right now.
Brandon,
yes.
If we pay taxes, why don't they give us the money back?
That is if you if they didn't, I guess they didn't need it. That's the only way I can come up with it. Tamara, you know how to. I don't know, because I never got a refund before, so I don't know.
You never
I
had
got.
income taxes?
What?
You never had income taxes?
Like a refund?
Yeah.
No, I have. Well, yeah, I had one refund once. It was for $10.
Wow.
Yeah, from the state of Kentucky. It said refund enclosed. I got it in the mail. I was so excited, and it said paid to the order of Brandon G. Bramlett, $10.
What's your middle name?
What's G?
Gregory, my dad's name. But anyway, you will have to pay taxes when you get a job. There will have to be a certain time that you pay taxes. You need to get your taxes paid between January and April of the next year to pay for the prior year taxes. You guys need to know that. That's basically what happened here in not Jesus' day, before he was born. This is what was happening around the time of Jesus' birth. There was a tax taking place. It came tax time, and Caesar needed his moolah. Caesar needed his money to pay for the military, to pay the government, and everything like that. So he says, all right, it's time for everybody to pay their taxes. But there's something interesting that happens when you pay taxes during this time. It says this was the first registration when Quirinius was governor of Syria. He was just a really great administrator, great soldier. And we read in verse 3 that everybody went to be registered, each to his own town. Now here's the important thing about this taxation. When you guys have to pay taxes, all you have to do basically is go to a tax agent. You can go through Jackson Hewitt. You can go through the lady there in La Center. TurboTax, that you can do your own taxes if you want to. I don't suggest it. But that's all you really have to do. You just have to go to an agent. Well, what they had to do in these days surrounding Jesus' birth, when he was about to be born, when they had to pay their taxes, they had to go home. They had to go each to their own town. So in order for them to pay taxes correctly, they had to go back to the place where they were born.
Except the women.
Except the women. Yes, women weren't required to do that. Thanks for remembering that from last time. And remember, I talked about Patra, for example. If she were to go to California singing and needed to pay her taxes, she'd have to come back to Bowder County. You guys remember me saying that?
Yeah.
Well, that's basically what had to happen here. And here's Joseph and Mary in this story as we're going to read. And Joseph has to pay his taxes, so he needs to go back to his hometown. That's really important that we see this. And here's why I think Luke has this part of the scripture for us. Because Mary and Joseph were actually in Nazareth at this time, and they needed to be in Bethlehem. Because the Old Testament promised that Jesus, if he was going to be the Messiah, would be born where?
Bethlehem.
Bethlehem, yes. He needed to be born in Bethlehem, but there's a problem here. They're not in Bethlehem right now, and she's about to have a baby. She's really got a big baby bump right now. She's about to have a baby, and they're in Nazareth. So I wonder if God's plan is going to get messed up because they are in Nazareth and they need to be in Bethlehem. If Jesus is born in Nazareth, then he can't be the Messiah. So let's see what happens there, because again, Mary was, when she found out she was pregnant, she went to her relative Elizabeth, who was pregnant with John the Baptist, who prepares the way for Jesus. Those of you who went to the gift with us can remember him. He was the guy that had the funny looking hair and was baptizing people. Remember that? That's John the Baptist. Anyway, she visits Elizabeth, who's pregnant with John the Baptist, and it says she stayed with her about 3 months, and then she returned home. So here she was with Joseph in Nazareth and not Bethlehem, but she needed to be in Bethlehem. Micah 5:2 basically says that Jesus will be born from the little place called Bethlehem. So, all right. Let's see here. And let me go back actually to verse 3. It says, all went to be registered each to his own town. So everybody's obedient. Everybody's going home. Everybody's going back to their hometown to be registered so that they can pay their taxes. Do what?
Other two lines.
No.
We didn't read those.
Oh, no, don't worry about it. Okay, so we saw the historical circumstances. You know, Jesus was actually born in different historical circumstances. For example, if somebody was writing a biography about Grace when she was born. Let's say somebody was, I don't know, I'm talking about her probably. Let's say somebody writes a biography about Grace when she was born, okay? They would include certain historical details in there, wouldn't they? They would say Grace was born the year 2015.
Yeah, that's what I said.
the year 2015, when Obama's presidential
Obamacare.
term was about to run up, and he would be soon replaced by Donald Trump or Ted Cruz or Ben Carson, one of those three likely. There would be certain historical details, wouldn't there? If somebody were writing a biography about somebody born today. You know, there have been Paris, there's been attacks in Paris. You know, we're in a war with radical Islam when this person so-and-so was born. There would be certain historical details surrounding that. Well, there was certain historical details surrounding the birth of Jesus. It was an actual birth. It was an actual time when Jesus entered into history and was born. So we've seen that the birth of Jesus is historical. It's something that actually took place. There were actual circumstances surrounding it. But secondly, I want us to see that the birth of Jesus is messianic. Does anybody know what messianic means?
Messy?
No. I mean, it probably was if it was anything like any other birth. Messianic sounds like the word Messiah, doesn't it? Sounds a lot like the word Messiah. Well, that's what it means. Jesus' birth was messianic. It was Messiah-like. The Messiah in the Old Testament was the one who God promised would come and save God's people, basically. And we're going to look at a couple scriptures about that. But the birth of Jesus is messianic. It is Messiah-like. Luke now focuses on the individual family that bring about the birth of Jesus. And who are those two people? Mary and Joseph, yes. Or Joseph and Mary, vice versa, however you want to say it. He focused first on the worldwide circumstances surrounding Jesus' birth, that a decree went out, you know, that everybody needs to be registered, go back to their hometown. Well, now he's focusing on Joseph. What does he say that Joseph does, Darian? You want to read the text? You were up next, so.
And Joseph also went to Galilee from the town of Nazareth to Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house of lineage of David, to be registered with Mary, his betrothed, who was the child. Joseph goes with
Yes,
What is betrothal?
thank you. I'll explain that in a minute. You should remember already. But they leave Nazareth, don't they? It says Joseph went up from Galilee, from the town of Nazareth. Okay, Nazareth was a town, and Jesus did a lot of ministry there when he was 30 to 33. But he leaves Galilee, right, to Judea, the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and lineage of David. And he goes with Mary. There's no reason for Mary really to go with him. Remember, we learned last time that women didn't have to pay their taxes. Women didn't have to register for this taxation like the men did. They just weren't allowed to own property and different things like that for a very long time. But Joseph goes to his hometown, which is what? Bethlehem, which is exactly where Jesus needs to be born in order to be the Messiah, right? Micah 5:2 again says that Jesus will be born in Bethlehem. But Mary goes with him, and I believe that the reason that she goes with him because they're in love. I mean, they wouldn't want to be separated at a point like this. Don't you think? I mean, here she is about to give birth to the supposed Son of God, and she just doesn't want him to be absent from that. And I can understand that, and I'm sure you can too. But what is the importance here of Bethlehem? I'm going to show you. The Messiah, this person in the Old Testament, this man in the Old Testament that all the writers of the Old Testament talk about, that's going to come and save God's people and make everything right. He's this ruler, this peaceful man who's going to come and make everything right. Here's why he must be born in Bethlehem. These scriptures testify. It says, "And he said, Hear then, O house of David." Okay? This ruler has to be of the lineage of David. And who was David? Let's just talk about it. Who was David?
Wasn't he this? Is this the same one that defeated Goliath?
Yes. David defeated Goliath, correct? He was a king. Anything else about David?
Shepherd.
He was a shepherd. What else?
He is a slingshot.
No. David. You all know who David is, all right? He slayed Goliath. He committed adultery with Bathsheba. He wrote the largest portion of the Psalms, and he was Israel's greatest king. And God promises to David that this Messiah will be born as David's descendant. The Messiah, and this may be hard for you guys to grasp, but it'll all make sense here in a moment, I promise you. The Messiah must be born through David's royal line. In order to be the King of Kings, the King of the Jews, the King of the world, basically, he has to be born through the lineage of David. And here's the passage that attests to that. Hear then, O house of David, is it too little for you? Is it too little for you to wear? That you, I don't even know what that part. Anyway, let's look at verse 14. Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. So in this passage it says that this will happen to the house of David, to the lineage and descendants of David. It says, therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and you shall call his name Emmanuel. If you read the Christmas story in Matthew chapter 1, it says there that they gave him the name Emmanuel because it means God with us. And in Isaiah 11, there at the bottom, it says, there shall come forth a shoot from the stump of Jesse. Jesse was David's father, and a branch from his roots shall bear fruit, and the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and of the fear of the Lord. So in that passage it says that a root, a shoot, will come up out of the stump, out of the family of David. Jesse again was David's father. One more passage here. It says, behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will raise up for David a righteous branch, or like a branch on a tree. He shall reign as king and deal wisely, shall execute justice and righteousness in the land, and so on. So basically the Old Testament says that if there is going to be a Messiah, he will be David's great-great-grandson. That is the number one requirement for a man to be the Messiah, the one who will save God's people from sin and give them eternal life. So how does Jesus fit these requirements here? It says Joseph went up from Galilee from the town of Nazareth to the city of David. Okay, remember the Messiah has to be born where? In the city of David. And here's Joseph with Mary in the city of David. I wonder if it could be possible, as Nicodemus was questioning during the gift, I wonder if it could be possible that this man could really be the Messiah. This baby boy could really be the Messiah. Well, he's going to be. It says there that he went to the city of David because that was his lineage. He was the great-great-grandson of David. And he's going to be born there in the town of Bethlehem. He goes with Mary, his betrothed. And betrothed means they were basically pledged to be married, engaged. So he goes up with her, who was with child. And then finally, she gives birth. So we saw that it was historic. We saw that this birth of Jesus is going to be messianic. He has to be the Messiah because he's going to be born in the city of David. He will be the King of Kings. And it says in verse 6, and while they were there, the time came for her to give birth. And she gave birth to her firstborn son, wrapped him in swaddling cloths, laid him in a manger because there was no place for them in the inn. And that's really the end of the Christmas story there, documenting the birth of Jesus. And Jesus probably made a sound like that, I'm sure.
In the gift, did they say anything about him getting turned away from
the inn?
No.
Turned away from the inn?
Yeah.
No.
No, because that's not in the Bible. Yeah. They didn't get turned away necessarily. It just says there was no place for them in the inn. They were just too full. They probably did get turned away. I'll take that back. They probably did get turned away, but not because they were poor or anything like that. It just was too full. And I'll explain what that is. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the city of David, here's Joseph, who is of the descent of David. So if he marries Mary, if he gets married to this young lady named Mary who's about to give birth, then that would automatically make Jesus the Messiah who has been promised, okay? Don't want to lose you here tonight. When they arrived in Bethlehem, Mary's water broke. She was ready to give birth. Said the time came for her to give birth. You guys know what that means, basically. You know, if you've ever seen somebody that's about to give birth, you know, they are really just, you know, like your sisters or you got relatives, somebody, you're waiting in a hospital room with them, and they're about to give birth. You know what that means when it says the time came for her to give birth. We can say that about all our relatives and family members who have had children. And it says that she gave birth to her firstborn son. Now the firstborn son, back in this time, would inherit everything that was the father's. So everything that was Joseph's, his line of work, His royal name, his royal lineage would be passed on to Jesus.
But the second one, like when the second birth son have all the mother stuff.
Yeah,
The
basically.
Sons, the eagles.
Yeah, I guess. She gave birth to her firstborn son, wrapped him in swaddling cloths, laid him in a manger because there was no place for them in the inn. Now, swaddling cloths were like strips of cloth and material that was wrapped around a baby, believed to help them grow correctly. Believed to help their limbs grow correctly. So, yes, exactly. And to give the baby security, you know. There's a reason why today you still give a child, when it's born, a blanket or a teddy bear or something like that. It helps them feel secure. That was another purpose for it back in this time. But she wrapped him in swaddling cloths, just like she would any other Jewish boy. Jesus was not thinking at this time, oh, I can't wait to save the world. No, Jesus was thinking, goo goo dada. You know, I mean, he was a baby. He was a baby at this time. So she wrapped him in swaddling cloths. He was helpless. He was crying. And she laid him in a manger, it says. Laid him in a manger. Now, you know already that a manger is an animal feeding trough. It's something that animals eat out of. This is a pretty close replica here to what a manger is. You might see these on farms or close to farms or whatever, but cows come by, donkeys come by, horses come by, pigs come by, and they eat out of an animal feeding trough. This right here is a manger, basically. And that's what she laid the baby Jesus in, is a manger. Because there was no place for them in the inn. Let me just put it in contextual terms here. Let's imagine that Motel 6 in Paducah is a public motel that anybody can come to and they can stay for free and they can just stay one night and they can be on their way if they're traveling, okay? That's what an inn was back in this time. It was like a public motel you could stay in, but it was just too full. They didn't have room for them. They didn't have room for Mary and Joseph, pregnant Mary and Joseph. But I'm going to tell you something. This manger was the first king-size bed there ever was, if you're wondering. So let's conclude here. These are the three important things about the Christmas story, okay, that you need to understand. First, the birth of Jesus is what? Historical, yes. He was born in actual historical circumstances. He was a real baby that was born in real time. His birth was messianic, meaning he was the Messiah. He is not just some normal child, and he is a normal child in many senses, but he was the Messiah child. He was the Christ child who would grow up, be crucified on a cross, and be resurrected. And then finally, his birth is humble. He was born in a lowly manner, lowly manger. He was not born on a red carpet. He wasn't born in a hospital even. He was born in a manger. Very humble circumstances for the King who would come and die on the cross for us. And I want to point out a couple of parallels for you. There's a lot that is similar to the death of Jesus and the birth of Jesus here. You know, Jesus was born because God used Rome, didn't he? He moved in the heart of Caesar Augustus to issue a decree, because Caesar Augustus was the ruler of Rome at that time, that everybody needs to go back to their hometown so that he would be born in the prophesied birthplace. Well, God also used Rome to crucify Jesus. Crucifixion, when Jesus died on the cross, that was a Roman form of execution. There was a Joseph present at his birth, and there was a Joseph present at his death. Joseph of Arimathea gets Jesus' body off of the cross when he dies and buries him in a borrowed tomb. He was laid in a borrowed manger at his birth, and he was laid and buried in a borrowed tomb at his death. You know, Jesus didn't own anything when he was on this earth besides his cloak. And Roman soldiers cast lots for that cloak. It was like, gambling for that cloak. I know it. He was laid in a borrowed manger. There was no place for him to be born, so they had to borrow a manger for him to be born. And if you were paying attention to the gift, he was also buried in a borrowed tomb. Joseph of Arimathea was gracious enough. Luke actually calls him a good and righteous man. And he was gracious enough to borrow a tomb for Jesus to be buried in. He was wrapped in swaddling cloths at his birth to give him security and help him grow correctly. And he was wrapped in linens at his death. It says there that Joseph of Arimathea also took linens and wrapped his dead body in linens. And there were angels present at his birth. That's what we're going to see next time, the heavenly announcement. And there were angels present at his death, weren't they? They were sitting on the rock that had been moved out of the way, basically just chilling there. And here comes the women to check out where Jesus' body had been. They're like, you're in the wrong place, honey. Why are you looking for the living among the dead? He's risen. So, maybe they didn't say honey. But anyway, there was also a time for Jesus to be born. There was a time for Jesus to die. You know, this is a great account of the Christmas story. The other version of the Christmas story, I guess you can say, is in Matthew 1, but what we've seen tonight is Luke 2. I hope you guys realize how important that this night really is. This is when God Himself entered into history as a helpless baby who needs somebody to take care of him, who needed somebody to teach him how to eat. You know, he had to be potty trained, all that kind of stuff, because he was just a regular boy. But he would grow up one day. He would die on a cross for your sin and for mine, satisfying God's wrath against us for our sin, dying in our place. And then He would rise again the third day to go back. And He will come back again as the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. But these three things is what makes Christmas, the Christmas story, so special, is that Jesus was actually born in historical circumstances. His birth was messianic. He is the Messiah. There is no other Messiah. He is the Christ child who came into the world to seek and save the lost. And He was born in very humble circumstances. So, I hope you understand tonight that the Christmas story is all three of those things: historic, messianic, and humble. And He did it all for you guys. He didn't just come down here because the Father made Him do it. You know, He wasn't. The Father wasn't wrestling Jesus to the floor, making Him come down to earth, saying that He had to do this. He came willingly. He left heaven. He left His throne in heaven. And I can just imagine the angels, you know, rejoicing that He had left heaven because of what He was about to do. But He left heaven for you and for me to take on our helpless form so that we could identify with Him, so that we could have a friend in Jesus. Because God became a man, we've got somebody we can go to who knows what it's like to suffer, you know, somebody who knows what it's like to do without, to go to somebody who is just like us in every way, except without sin.